The teaching of writing, a genre approach. What is writing? What are genres? Let's go and explore. Writing is a higher order thinking skill, and it develops over time through interactions between cognitive resources, so the actual ability of the brain to learn to be a writer, the instructional context, so what is the environment, what's happening around the person who's writing to help them learn, you as the teacher, and the demands of the writing task, so audience, purpose, what's expected, all of these things work together to make a writer. The first steps in writing material are particularly useful. I highly recommend that you Google first steps in writing, and you'll be able to download 2 PDFs. One is a writing map, and the which sort of defines some phases for writing, learning to write, and another resource which is the PDF that's resources on sort of teaching ideas, and they connect to each other. So you should be able to find these resources quite easily with a Google search. So there are a range of phases in the first steps in writing, and of course my little snapshots here aren't meant for you to be able to read, but just little snapshots to give you an idea. There are different phases, and I'm just going to go through each of those now. So the role play phase. So here writers emulate adult writing by experimenting with marks on the page to represent written language. Okay, so they understand perhaps that there's a purpose for conveying meaning through writing, but the sound symbol relationships and understandings aren't there, they're yet to develop, and the messages are not able to be read by others. The experimental phase. In this phase, writers are aware that speech can be written down. They rely on familiar topics to generate purposeful text, such as a happy birthday card or a shopping list. So they understand and can demonstrate a one-to-one correspondence, and so they'll be able to tell you what their written words are on the page, but you might only be able to see 1 or 2 letters that show a developing understanding of sound symbol relationships. The early phase. Here writers will produce a small range of texts which exhibit some of the conventions of writing, so things like retells, okay, or the sharing of experiences. There might be a small bank of frequently used words which might be spelt correctly, and when writing unknown words, they choose letters on the basis of sound. The transitional phase. Transitional writers show increasing control over those conventions, so you might see some punctuation, some playing around with spelling and text organisation. They begin to think about audience and purpose, understand that a recipe is for someone who might be doing some cooking, for example, and a range of texts might include explanations, narratives, brochures. So there's a bank of known words developing. They rely heavily on sounding out unknown words, but maybe beginning to integrate some visual and meaning-based strategies to spelling. The conventional phase. So conventional writers demonstrate control over the conventions of writing and most components of the process. Okay, start to compose a range of different texts, informational texts, biographies, documentaries. They're beginning to write an increasing known bank of words, and the vocabulary is broadening, and they're starting to integrate a range of strategies to spell unknown words. The proficient phase. Here you will see proficient writers demonstrate control over all components of the writing process. The texts that they compose become more and more complex. Newspaper articles, expositions. We can see multi-strategic approach to spelling. The accomplished phase. Accomplished writers are able to make critical choices about all components of writing, including style, vocabulary, and content. They're able to craft a whole range of texts and evaluate and critique their own writing. I'm just going to go back. They're able to critique their own writing. And the first steps in writing resource really gives you a deep understanding of a developmental approach to learning to be a writer. And it's a really great resource for mapping students' abilities and thinking about what next for your students. And there's a really great range of teaching ideas and resources to support that mapping and those progressions of learning in writing. So what is this concept of genre? It's one approach to teaching writing. So a genre approach to teaching writing was developed by Halliday sort of in the 90s. He also developed systemic functional language. But genre is really about understanding that the things that we write are a social process, and we have a social understanding of how language is used to communicate. So for example, if I ask you to think about communicating how to cook your favourite meal to me, and think about what are the things that you might write down or put on a piece of paper, or write how you would communicate that with me. I bet we would come up with some similar things because we have a social understanding of what's expected. For example, I'm sure you'll be thinking about ingredients or utensils or a list of steps, maybe even a photograph. And so that's just a really simple example of thinking about understanding genre and how we talk about it as a social process, because we all have an understanding of conventions of writing, and audience and purpose, and that these influence the structure and the language choices that we make when writing. So the main genres are to describe, persuade, instruct, explain, narrate, recount, and transact. And so each genre has a series of processes involved and a range of text types. So for example, to describe involves identifying, ordering, classifying, listing, describing, defining. Okay, and there's a range of text types, for example, that are suitable to do that. Information reports, investigation reports, scientific technical reports, a personal description or an imaginative description. And you can see that within each genre are a whole range of text types which have been developed over time socially to suit a particular purpose for an intended audience. So there are a defined set of practices that go with each of these. And so in the workshops, we'll unpack these genres and text types, including the structure and language features of these. So the workshops will be fun. But before I go, I want you to take a moment and think about the genres that you've engaged with your communication today as part of your everyday life. What are the text types you've engaged with? How and why and who have you used them for? What were their structure, and what kind of language did you choose to use or engage with as you've been communicating today? And just think about those things with a genre lens and approach, and I look forward to working with you more about those.